As well as his loyal group of supporters, many members of the last Trump administration may have found themselves outside his circle of trust and even on the so-called enemy list, including the former US National Security Advisor John Bolton, who had this to say about his former boss when asked about him back on Al Arabiya in September.
Well, Trump says openly that he thinks his personal relations with the head of state, particularly of American adversaries, are an exact description of the state-to-state relationships between the United States and that other country, North Korea or whatever. That's completely wrong. There's certainly a role for personal relations in international affairs, but these hard men, Putin, Xi, Kim, they know what their national interests are, and that's what they pursue. They're not pursuing personal relations. I've been in rooms with Trump and all three of them at different times, and know them otherwise. Look, I think they believe Trump is a laughing fool, and they will take advantage of him accordingly, and that's dangerous for the United States, obviously.
Okay, well, we can speak now to Ambassador John Bolton, who we just heard there in that clip, who is, of course, the former US National Security Advisor. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been 2 months, roughly, since we spoke to you last. Do you stand by the comments you made when you spoke to us last time?
Sure, Trump hasn't changed in that period, and now that he's won election, I think we're going to see an intensification of efforts by foreign leaders to influence him and to try and move him in their direction on the issues that are important to them. It's not clear Trump has any better understanding than he ever did before of what these issues really involve, what the stakes are, what the risks are. But it's never deterred him from engaging in the past, because he just doesn't think things like factual information or those sorts of variables really mean anything. He does think it's all about personal relations.
And Mr. Bolton, how did you react when the news came in that Donald Trump had won a second term at the White House?
Well, I was asleep, actually. I could see the direction things were moving in, and I figured I might as well get some sleep. It would be a long couple of weeks ahead. The polls were very close. It could have gone either way. There's no doubt about it. And Trump's got a mandate, but it's not a huge mandate. And, we'll see what he does with it.
Okay, so we've heard that clip of you speaking to us just before we crossed to you. You've also described Donald Trump at other stages as being unfit for office. So I'm assuming that you've ruled out, have you, any future collaboration with the next Trump administration?
Right. Well, as the saying goes, I'm not sitting home alone by the phone waiting for him to call. That's for sure.
All right. Well, I wanted to ask you as well, someone who was quick to pick up the telephone was President Vladimir Putin, who congratulated Donald Trump on Thursday and praised him for showing courage. She says that Moscow is ready for dialogue. I'd just like to get your take on how you'd characterize the state of relations between those two men.
Well, it has been reported that Trump has had a number of phone calls with Putin during the time after he left the presidency and the election. It's not clear to me that that's accurate. The Russians deny it, but maybe it's true. I think that Trump felt he had a very good personal friendship with Putin. I don't think that's how Putin saw it. As I said a couple of months ago, he thinks Trump's an easy mark. It's somebody he can take advantage of. He knows how to manipulate him. He uses flattery and other techniques to get what he wants from Russia's national interest perspective. And I think that obviously between Russia and the United States at the moment, the question of Ukraine would be number one on the priority list. And I'm sure Putin is considering exactly how in that conversation to move Trump, perhaps to call for a ceasefire, negotiations, or whatever Putin thinks would put Russia in the best bargaining position.
So if there is a possible end in sight for Ukraine, is there any indication at all that Mr. Trump can make good on his promise to fix things with a phone call?
Well, I don't think there's any chance of that happening. I mean, Trump has said a variety of things, including that he would get Zelensky and Putin in a room together and solve it in 24 hours. Zelensky has already made the obvious point that isn't going to happen since Ukraine isn't going to surrender. But here's where this personal relationship issue comes into play. I don't think Trump thinks very highly of Zelensky. I think Trump still believes this fantasy that Ukraine was working against him in the 2016 election. He still wants to know where the famous Hillary Clinton computer server is, where it's hidden in Ukraine, and he resents the idea that Ukraine was used against him in his first impeachment. Whereas the view that Trump has in his mind of Russia and Putin in particular is much more favorable. And I think any kind of interaction that Trump might initiate is very likely, in fact, almost certain to end in something detrimental for Ukraine.
And with regards to relationships, can Trump use his relationship with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and also leaders in the Middle East to bring about peace in Gaza and also in Lebanon?
I think what Trump wants more than anything else, both in Ukraine, but in the war in the Middle East as well, is he wants it over and out of the way by January the 20th. He thinks these are Biden's wars. If he had been president, as he said during the campaign, neither war would have happened, which is these are statements that are obviously neither provable nor disprovable, but only to tout his own virtues. But what he really wants is not to have to deal with them. And from that perspective, he doesn't necessarily have a preferred outcome for the Middle East or Ukraine as long as they go away. I think the chances of either conflict going away are essentially zero. So Trump will have to deal with them, but it's not because he has a plan for how they would end optimally from the American point of view. He just would rather not be bothered. He has other things on his mind, like initiating a trade war with most of the rest of the world by imposing tariffs on all goods imported into the United States. Of 10 or 20%. It's a proposal that could crash the American economy and crash the global economy as well.
And obviously, to resolve the situation in Lebanon and in Gaza, obviously Iran has been playing a part in all of this. And I'm just wondering how worried you think the Iranian regime should be about the return of Donald Trump.
Well, I think they are worried. I think their efforts to interfere in the election were try and slow down Trump. Of course, the Russians were doing the opposite. They were trying to help Trump because they wanted him elected. So maybe the two canceled out. But I think it's widely held in the United States as well as in Israel that Iran is responsible for this conflict in the Middle East. This is not a war of Palestinians against Israel or a war of Arabs against Israel. This is a war of Iran against Israel and manifested through the terrorist groups that Iran has armed and equipped and trained and financed for many decades, not for the use of the terrorists, but for when Iran felt it was an appropriate moment to strike. So I think this is an opportunity for Netanyahu, particularly during the transition period between the American election and the swearing in of the new president on January the 20th, where Netanyahu may have a relatively free hand to go after other targets in Iran, including the nuclear weapons program. Now, whether he will or not, I don't know, but I don't think Trump would voice objection to it.
Well, the return of Trump probably wasn't the desired outcome for a number of European and NATO countries. What do you, and also the leaders, do you think their apparent sense of vulnerability is justified? Can Europe actually go it alone?
Well, I don't think in present circumstances they're capable of it for a long time. And unfortunately, their unwillingness to spend what they should on defense plays into Trump's hand. He's trying to tell Americans that this alliance means we defend Europe, we get nothing out of it. And they don't pay us. So why are we doing this? It neglects to explain what a collective defense alliance does. It helps make the U.S. more secure, as well as the Europeans. And so I'm very worried that this could end up with with miscommunication between the European countries and the United States, where they now have President Macron of France and others saying we need an independent European military capability. Honestly, if they go too far down that road, even more Americans than Trump will say, well, fine, let the Europeans defend themselves.
You mentioned the transition to the new presidency just a moment ago, and I just want to ask you about your thoughts with regards to the transition. Do you think it's going to be peaceful? And given what we've heard from the outgoing Biden administration, do you think it's going to be productive?
Look, I think almost every transition in American history has been peaceful and particularly more recent years, very productive. It was Donald Trump's exit in 2020 that was atypical of the transition process. And I personally have been involved in quite a number of them, both going in and going out. So it's something it's part of it's not in the Constitution, but it's part of the norms of the way Americans transfer power peacefully after an election. As I say, the only real exception to that norm was Donald Trump. This time, conveniently for Trump, he won. So he didn't invite Biden to the White House in 2020, but Biden has invited him for lunch, and lo and behold, Trump's going to go. So I give Biden credit here. It's got to be painful for him. He was driven out of the election by his own party, couldn't defend himself in the general election against Trump's attacks. But as the outgoing president, he's doing the right thing. He's extending the open hand to Trump. He's offered to cooperate with Trump's transition team. That's the right way to go. And it is an example. Maybe Trump will pick up on it.
During his campaign, Mr. Trump talked about facing an enemy from within. In your opinion, who or what was he referring to there?
I think Trump was referring to anybody who disagreed with him, and that's a long list of people. I do think a retribution presidency is on his mind. I hope I'm wrong on that, but knowing Trump, I don't think so, and I think it could cause the country a lot of damage. We'll see what happens. Maybe he can be distracted by his appointees to do other things. I hope that's right, but I don't think so.
Yeah, we're just receiving word actually of the authorities in the United States trying to pursue legal recourse with regards to the Iranian assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And given that news has just come into us, I just wanted to ask you, given what we saw on the campaign trail, so much of it was unprecedented, not least one real assassination attempt and some other attempts that were interpreted as being real, although there were no shots fired. Do you see a risk of more of the same, some violence between now and January when he's inaugurated?
Well, I think the two attempts against Trump this time were not Iran related. They were due probably to emotionally disturbed people, and you can't rule that out. But I don't think there's going to be any significant violence related to the election. Now, in part, that's because Trump won. And, he's not alleging the election was stolen. It raises also the question, why didn't the Democrats steal it this time if they stole it in 2020? It helps undercut the whole theory that there was an effort by the Democrats to steal it in 2020. Trump lost it in that election, and he just can't admit it. That's the real problem. But hopefully the transition goes forward and we have a peaceful transfer of power. I think the Iranian threat against Trump is real. I haven't read this latest indictment, but in my own case, about a year and a half ago, they indicted an Iranian official named Shamanpour Safi, who was trying to hire a hitman to assassinate me. So this is just one of several efforts by Iran to go after current and former U.S. officials and private American citizens like Masih Alinejad, who was the subject of exactly the same kind of effort. This is totally unacceptable. And I do think, if nothing else, because Trump himself understands the nature of the threat, that his administration may be more active in trying to prevent Iran from doing it, not just threatening them.
Yeah, a little bit more clarity on that report just coming into us. US prosecutors announce charges in alleged Iranian plot to assassinate Trump. That's the latest we've got for you on that. Clearly, in this environment, there are going to be a lot of unhappy people in the United States. A lot of people will be fearful of a second Trump presidency. Do you think in this context, security for the president-elect is going to have to be beefed up?
Well, I think after the assassination attempts, the Secret Service did increase protection. They're a very professional force. These earlier attempts were obviously very problematic, but I think they're going to be as careful as they can be. And in the run-up to the inauguration itself, I'm sure security in Washington will be at its most intense.
And just lastly, we've been talking a lot about the lineup in the Trump administration. Lots of announcements with regards to people in the team. I just want to ask you about a comment that Donald Trump made about you. An extraordinary comment, actually. He made it to Joe Rogan, describing you as a whack job. What went through your mind when you heard the former president and the president-elect, which Donald Trump is, making a comment of that nature?
Well, it's the way Trump is. It's a kind of juvenile response. But, after all, he hired me after watching me on Fox News for many years. So maybe he should ask himself why he did it.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. National Security Advisor, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
Thanks for having me.